The winter of 1943 was not made for men. It was a season of iron and ghosts, where engines froze before dawn, and soldiers disappeared into snowdrifts so deep they became part of the landscape. Yet, amid that endless white wasteland, one machine refused to die. Its name in the Soviet registry was Unit 225, but to those who served near it, whispered in mess halls and foxholes alike, it was the prayer tank. Born from the roaring furnaces of the factories, this T-34 should have been no different from the hundreds that rolled onto the Eastern Front every week. Hastily painted, welded by tired hands, powered by the same diesel heart that kept the Red Army moving westward, but from the moment Unit 225 was assembled, its history diverged. The first crew that received it in early '43 wrote that its starter wouldn't turn, until one of the mechanics, a former seminarian from Smolensk, traced a small cross in the oil slick grime over the ignition panel. The engine roared to life immediately, the sound echoing like a hymn through the frozen valley. Weeks later, Kursk Unit 225 was annihilated. A direct hit from a Panzer IV shell tore through the turret and set the fuel ablaze. The wreck was left behind as Soviet troops retreated. But when engineers returned days later, they found the tank upright, not burned through, its interior uncharred, as if the fire had stopped just short of consuming it. The bodies of the crew were gone, leaving only the faint imprint of hands on the inner steel traced in-suit. The men who repaired it said the tank breathed. Its engine, AV to diesel, coughed, then rumbled to life on the first crank. Even though its cylinders were warped and its fuel lines mechanics refused to touch it at night, claiming the hull radiated heat even when cold. Some said they heard voices when the wind passed over the armor low, murmuring Russian words they couldn't fully catch. Others swore they heard a priest's chant when they opened the hatch. The second crew lasted only 2 weeks. During a mission outside Orel, the tank took 3 direct hits and vanished into a crater. The explosion was visible from miles away. Command marked it as destroyed. Yet a week later, Unit 225 rolled into the Soviet camp under its own power, covered in ash. The turret scorched, but intact. No crew inside, no tracks behind it in the snow. The men who saw it cross the ridge said it moved slowly, almost reverently, as if following an unseen hand guiding it home. From then on, soldiers began refusing to board it. Rumors spread faster than radio signals. Some claimed it was cursed that the souls of its first crew were trapped inside, doomed to fight forever. Others called it blessed, a vessel of divine retribution forged in steel. One officer tried to dismiss the tales until he himself heard the engine start without fuel. That night, a chaplain was summoned to bless it. He sprinkled holy water on the armor and whispered prayers for the dead. When he finished, he found his handprint burned into the steel, not by fire, but by frost so deep it crystallized his glove. Still, war has no patience for superstition. The Red Army needed every working machine it could find. Unit 225 was returned to the front, assigned to suicidal missions that even seasoned tankers dreaded. Crossing minefields, breaching German lines, rescuing stranded infantry, it survived all of it. Shells that tore apart companion tanks would deflect off its hull. Landmines failed to detonate beneath it. A German sniper once reported seeing the tank from his position and taking aim at its driver. Eslit, only for his bullet to ricochet back, shattering his own scope. Soon, even the enemy began to speak its name. German soldiers called it Das Gebetspanzer, the prayer tank. For them, it was an omen. Every time it appeared, something inexplicable followed. Fog that swallowed whole battalions, radios that filled with whispers, snow that fell red as dawn. One Wehrmacht officer wrote in his diary that his men refused to fire at it, claiming the machine moves like it already knows where it will die. By the end of that cursed winter, the prayer tank had been destroyed 3 times, and each time it returned, repaired but never explained. Its armor bore scars shaped like runes. Its engine hummed like a living heart. Those who dared to touch its steel said it vibrated faintly, as if murmuring prayers only the dead could understand. Was it faith that kept it alive? Luck, or something older than both? Something forged in the fires of sacrifice and bound by the voices of those who refused to be forgotten? No one knew. But one truth spread through the front lines like gospel. When the prayer tank rolled out, someone or something was listening. By the time Unit 225 rolled back into camp after the Third Battle of Smolensk, even the most skeptical officers refused to call it coincidence. The machine came limping through the smoke, its treads torn, armor scorched, antenna melted down to a blackened stub. Yet the engine thumped steadily, like a heartbeat refusing to fade. Mechanics swarmed it with wrenches and torches, only to freeze at what they saw inside. Along the turret's interior walls, beneath the peeling paint and powder residue, were handprints. Not in grease or ash, but pressed into the metal itself. 5 distinct marks, warped and sunken as if molten flesh had fused with steel. The strange thing was that no one on board had burns. Their uniforms were intact, their skin was unmarked. When questioned, the crew, for battle-hardened Siberians, stared blankly, offering the same response, "We didn't do that." The soldiers who tended the tank swore it vibrated differently now. Its idle hum carried a deeper rhythm, pulsing in sync with something unseen. At night, when the camp grew quiet, men claimed to hear murmurs through the hull, voices beneath the mechanical grind, whispering words in a dozen tongues. Some thought it was the wind. Others stopped trying to explain. Then came the first warning. During an artillery exchange outside Orsha, the driver, Corporal Sokolov, froze mid-left. "Now," he muttered suddenly, his voice low, distant. No one had spoken to him. Seconds later, a German shell exploded precisely where the tank had been a moment earlier. The entire crew looked at one another in silence. When pressed afterward, Sokolov said he hadn't heard the command. He had felt it, as if someone had leaned over his shoulder and whispered directly into his ear. After that, they began to listen. Through the freezing nights, the voices became clearer. Sometimes they came as whispers, other times as a faint choir echoing beneath the engine's rumble. The men said the language shifted, sometimes Russian, sometimes Polish, occasionally German, but always urgent. "Move," it would say. "Wait. They are watching. Turn east. Fire." The tank began reacting faster than any normal crew could manage, maneuvering through ambushes as if guided by invisible hands. During one engagement, the gunner, Private Dmitry Volkov, shouted that he heard his brother's voice calling out the coordinates of an enemy battery. His brother had been killed in Kursk months earlier. When he followed the direction, his shell hit an enemy half-track dead center. Volkov refused to fire another shot that day. Lieutenant Anton Hesnovi, the tank commander, was not a superstitious man. Before the war, he had studied engineering in Leningrad and mocked talk of omens, but even he began to keep a logbook. He recorded each whisper, each unexplained event, each instance where the voices guided their actions. The entries were fragmented, written in a trembling hand. February 3rd, voice said, "Move now." Saved us from artillery. February 6th, heard Polish prayer. "Zadusi polegi, ishitega, no Poles here." February 10th, they know before we do. February 12th, smell of burning oil before dawn. No leak found. Then, the words began to change. By mid-February, the whispers no longer warned or instructed. They spoke in riddles, prayers, and fragments of memory that made no sense to the living. Phrases like, "We remember the frozen river. They see through fire. The stars turn east again." Reznov's handwriting grew erratic. The ink smeared as if written in haste or fear. His final coherent note read, "The voices are not guiding us anymore. They are guiding the tank." During a night offensive 2 weeks later, Unit 225 went dark. Radio contact was lost at 0200 hours. The front lines were chaos, explosions, smoke, blizzards sweeping through the ravaged fields. Command assumed it was destroyed. But 12 hours later, the tank rolled back into Soviet lines at dawn, moving slowly, its armor coated in frost. The crew climbed out one by one, silent, their faces ashen. They refused food. They refused questions. Reznov's eyes were hollow, fixed on something far beyond the horizon. When a medic tried to take his pulse, the lieutenant muttered a single sentence, voice hoarse from smoke and terror. "The prayers are not for us anymore. They are for the machine." The logbook was found inside the turret, half burned, the last page covered in deep impressions, as though someone had carved the words with bare hands. The handwriting no longer matched. That night, a mechanic left the camp screaming, claiming he had seen the tank's periscope move on its own, scanning the frozen field like a man searching for someone lost. From then on, even the bravest soldiers avoided Unit 225 after dark. The engine would sometimes start by itself, humming in rhythm to an unseen prayer. And whenever it did, the men swore they could hear it again, that ghostly chorus rising faintly from within the steel. Voices of the dead, whispering through gears and pistons, keeping their vigil. Something inside the tank had awakened that it was no longer listening to men. By the time the summer of 1944 bled across the Eastern Front, Unit 225 was more than a machine. It was a myth wrapped in steel. The story spread faster than orders. A tank that refused to die. That moved when the dead prayed. That turned the tide of battles already lost. Soldiers whispered about it in the dugouts at night, tracing makeshift crosses or hammer-encicled talismans on their helmets before going to sleep. Even the atheists among them began muttering old Orthodox blessings, not for God, but for the tank. When the Siege of Orsha began, the Red Army was cornered. German artillery pinned 3 divisions along the Dnieper River, reducing every attempt at escape into a massacre. The fields were ash, the sky a constant blaze. Men dug into frozen mud and waited for orders that would never come. Reinforcements were impossible. The Luftwaffe ruled the air, and every bridge eastward was rubble. Commanders said any attempt to break out was suicide. But before dawn on June 26th, the horizon trembled with a sound no one expected. The low, steady growl of AV to Gizo engine. Out of the fog, through drifting smoke and the stench of burning oil, came a single silhouette, the prayer tank. Its hull was pitted and scarred, its treads half-melted from earlier campaigns, yet it moved with a kind of grace, as if drawn by purpose rather than fuel. The gun barrel glowed faintly red, not from firing, but from some inner heat, pulsing like a forge. Unit 225, reporting for duty, said the voice on the radio. But no one could identify who spoke. The call sign didn't match any registered crew. When command tried to respond, static drowned the channel. A soft, rhythmic hum like chanting beneath the noise. Then the tank advanced. German spotters opened fire immediately. Artillery batteries lined the hills, firing volley after volley. But something strange happened. Soldiers later swore the shells bent away, veering at impossible angles, detonating in midair or bursting harmlessly above the ground. It was as though the air itself had curved around the tank's path. Machine gun fire sparked off its armor without leaving a mark. The beast rolled forward unshaken, its gun turning smoothly, striking targets with inhuman precision. Soviet infantry, dazed by exhaustion and disbelief, began to follow. At first, a few men stumbled after it, shouting hoarsely. Then entire companies rose from their trenches, charging in its wake like pilgrims following a relic. The hand of God is with us. Someone screamed. Another swore he saw faint light radiating from the tank's rear armor, not reflection, but a glow, pale and steady. As the Red Army pushed forward, the Germans broke formation. Several survivors claimed they saw lightning descend from a cloudless sky, striking near their ammunition dumps. The explosions came in a chain, spreading across their defensive lines like a storm made of fire. Those who lived through it spoke of hearing singing in the thunder, not human, but mechanical, like a choir echoing through iron. By noon, it was over. The siege that should have lasted weeks ended in hours. The Soviet encirclement shattered. 3 divisions marched free through the breach left by Unit 225. When the smoke thinned, the tank was found at the center of a shallow crater, its turret still facing west. The engine hummed quietly, rhythmically, like a man breathing in his sleep. Its hatch was open. Inside sat the 4 crewmen, perfectly still. There were no wounds, no burns, no signs of suffocation. Their hands were clasped together, heads bowed as though in prayer. Every instrument on the dashboard had melted, yet the engine continued to idle for 2 full days before finally sputtering out. When engineers recovered it for transport, they noted something else carved into the turret. Just beneath the gun mount was a small steel cross, faintly etched, as though drawn by a trembling hand. No one admitted to making it. Some said it had always been there. Others said it appeared after the lightning strikes. Months later, when Unit 225 was sealed inside a military depot outside Minsk for examination, it lay dormant. The best Soviet engineers tried to revive it, replacing fuel lines, rewiring ignition, checking compression. Nothing! The tank was as lifeless as cold stone. Then one technician, a young soldier from Smolensk, placed his hand on the metal cross, tracing its outline absent-mindedly. The silence broke. Without power, without fuel, the starter motor whirred to life. gauges flickered. The engine coughed once, then roared. The entire workshop froze. The technician stumbled back, crossing himself instinctively. No untouched Unit 225 again. 4 weeks. Orders came from Moscow to seal the depot and post guards around the clock. One officer was overheard muttering, "It doesn't run on fuel. It runs on faith." And so, the tank that had once saved an army was locked away in darkness, still humming faintly at night, as if waiting for the next prayer to awaken it. When the war's smoke finally cleared and Europe began to breathe again, Unit 225, the prayer tank, was hauled away from the battlefield like a relic of some forgotten god. It arrived at a testing ground outside Leningrad in the autumn of 1946, transported under heavy guard. The men assigned to escort it were instructed not to speak of what they saw. They died on, but in hushed tones. One of them later claimed the tank's engine throbbed faintly all night, like a heart buried beneath metal at the facility. Soviet scientists and engineers treated it not as a machine, but as an enigma. They stripped the armor, dissected the turret, and examined every weld mark. Yet nothing explained how it had survived so many direct hits, or how its systems could have functioned after being torn apart. The first anomaly appeared within hours of its arrival. Every compass in the lab began spinning uncontrollably. Electrical tools malfunctioned. The concrete floor beneath the tank grew warm, not from friction or external heat, but as if the steel itself radiated energy. Technicians documented the phenomenon meticulously. Temperature maps showed shifting heat signatures inside the hull that sometimes resembled human silhouettes, faint, glowing figures huddled together in prayer. Instruments recorded low-frequency vibrations, too slow to be mechanical, too structured to be random. When amplified through speakers, the sound resembled distant chanting, rhythmic, solemn, almost mournful. When the main gun was tested, the results defied logic. The T-34's cannon had not been serviced in nearly 2 decades. Its barrel was rusted through, its internal components frozen solid. Yet during a remote firing test in 1962, without any crew inside, it discharged a shell with full power. The trigger mechanism had not been engaged. The command post monitoring the test lost all power for 7 minutes. And one observer swore he heard voices over the static whispering in Russian, "We still guard the line." By the 1950s, rumors of the tank's impossible behavior had reached the upper echelons of the Soviet military. The KGB intervened, classifying the entire project under the code name Project Orpheus, the name chosen for its mythological parallel. The man who ventured into the underworld to bring the dead back to life. Engineers assigned to the project theorized that the combination of extreme heat, carbonized remains, and layers of battle-hardened metal had created a conductive matrix, a kind of neural lattice. One document suggested that Unit 225 had, through trauma and repetition, developed electromechanical memory. It was not alive in the organic sense, they claimed, but it remembered. Other scientists disagreed. One, a former Red Army chaplain turned physicist, wrote in a secret memorandum, "The tank has no ghost in the machine. The machine is the ghost." During controlled experiments, researchers played recordings of Orthodox hymns near the hole. To their astonishment, radiation counters spiked each time the word Amen was spoken. When the same test was repeated with secular music, nothing happened. Even without fuel or ignition, faint vibrations passed through the armor whenever prayers were broadcast. In one report from 1958, a senior KGB officer described entering the sealed hangar at night and hearing a metallic hum echoing in the dark. Not like machinery, but like breath. He left his post the next morning, refusing to return. His official statement was redacted, but witnesses remembered a single line scrawled in his notebook. It prays when no one listens. By 1963, Moscow ordered the project terminated. Unit 225 was declared unstable and too dangerous for further testing. The official recommendation was destruction, but instead, the order came to entomb it. Buried under reinforced concrete at an undisclosed location north of Leningrad, the site was sealed, guarded for decades, and wiped from official maps. Yet, the story did not end there. In 1987, declassified photos revealed that the burial bunker was no longer intact. The massive steel doors had been forced outward from within. Concrete slabs were cracked. The guards' logs for that night were blank. Only one detail was ever confirmed: a set of tracks unmistakably from a T-34, led from the site into the forest. The trail continued for several kilometers before vanishing completely, ending in untouched snow. No fuel leaks, no debris, no footprints, just silence, and the impression of treads moving forward into the white expanse, as if the machine had once again answered a call that only it could hear. Some said the prayer tank had finally gone to rest. Others whispered that it was still out there, buried beneath the frost, waiting for the next war, the next prayer, the next voice brave enough to awaken the steel once more. For decades, after the Second World War had ended, and the iron beasts of that age had been relegated to rust and memory, Unit 225 surfaced again, not in battle, but in the shadows of another catastrophe. The Chernobyl disaster had turned a corner of Ukraine into a wasteland of silence and radiation, a place where time itself seemed suspended. Amid the skeletal forests and crumbling villages, soldiers and liquidators began reporting strange sights, flickers of movement in the mist, metallic echoes where no machines were operating. At first, the reports were dismissed as exhaustion-induced hallucinations. But then, in late autumn of 1986, a group of cleanup workers spotted what appeared to be an old T-34 tank, half consumed by rust and ash, crawling slowly across the ruins of a village near the exclusion zone. The faint numbers painted along its turret read 225. According to the official field log later confiscated by Soviet authorities, the tank moved without any visible crew. Its treads left deep impressions in the mud, and its headlight flickered as though powered by a dying heart. It advanced toward the remnants of a church. Its dome collapsed, its crucifix half buried in dust, and stopped. Witnesses swore the turret turned east, facing the horizon where dawn was beginning to break. Then, with a sound like a single breath, the engine roared to life for a few seconds before falling silent forever. When a radiation team approached, they found the vehicle cold to the touch. The interior was sealed by corrosion, yet when they managed to pry the hatch open, they discovered something that made the soldiers cross themselves despite orders forbidding religious gestures. Inside, upon the driver's seat, rested a small, weathered icon of St. Michael the Archangel, the protector of soldiers, perfectly preserved, untouched by the searing radiation that had corroded everything else in the exclusions. Beneath it lay a notebook wrapped in brittle cloth. The notebook's pages were filled with handwritten names, thousands of them, listed under regiments and dates stretching across the Eastern Front: Kursk, Smolensk, Orsha, Minsk. Many of the names were never found in Soviet records. Historians later confirmed that some belonged to soldiers officially classified as missing in action. It was as if the tank had been keeping its own record, a memorial written not by human hands, but by memory itself. No one could explain how Unit 225 had reached Chernobyl. The region had no accessible roads from its last known burial site near Leningrad. There were no tire marks leading in or out. Satellite photos taken days before showed nothing, only scorched earth and broken stone. Yet, there it was. The prayer tank, once again emerging from history, like a ghost that refused to rest. Engineers from the Soviet Ministry of Defense examined the vehicle but found no trace of modern interference. Its fuel lines were dry, its battery dead for decades, and its control rods fused with rust. Still, instruments placed near it recorded weak electromagnetic fluctuations, rhythmic pulses, repeating every 60 seconds like a heartbeat. To some, the explanation was simple: a coincidence born from radiation, static electricity, and the fevered imaginations of tired men. But for those who had read the reports from Project Orpheus, the reappearance of Unit 225 meant something else. That the machine, once born from war and blood, had become something beyond comprehension. A relic not of destruction, but of faith. Theologians who studied the account later described it as a mechanical miracle, a manifestation of the prayers whispered inside its hull during the war. Prayers so powerful, so desperate, that they imprinted themselves onto the iron. Perhaps, one priest wrote, the souls that perished within did not fade, but learned to speak through steel. In the years since, the prayer tank has become a myth among locals living on the edges of the Chernobyl exclusion zone. Some say it still lies buried beneath the earth, guarding the ruins like a silent sentinel. Others insist they've seen its silhouette on foggy mornings, the faint glow of its headlamp cutting through the mist before vanishing. Hunters and travelers tell of hearing a distant rumble deep in the woods, a mechanical growl that fades into what sounds eerily like men praying in Russian to the rationale world. It is a ghost story. To those who have walked the irradiated forests and heard that haunting sound, it is something far more profound. A reminder that not all spirits wear flesh, and not all prayers come from human lips. And when the winter winds sweep through the pine forests near Chernobyl, locals still pause and listen. For in the rustle of branches and the low murmur of the wind, there is sometimes a whisper, soft but clear.